Chief Adeyemi stared at the young woman lying on the hospital bed. Something about her felt familiar, very familiar. Then suddenly, it hit him. His eyes widened. No! Impossible! Slowly, he stepped closer. The eyes, the face, then the word escaped his lips. Sandra. There was silence. For the first time in years, fear appeared on Chief's face. Real fear. Just then, the doctor walked in. He glanced at Sandra's file, then frowned. I think she lost her memory. Silence. Chief stared at Sandra. Then, slowly, his fear disappeared. And a smile replaced it. Not relief. Something darker. Something dangerous. Because suddenly, the only person who could recognize him no longer remembered who he was. And Chief intended to keep it that way.
3 years ago, in a busy part of Lagos, Desmond and his wife Sandra were simply trying to survive. Life had not been easy for them. In fact, life had been hard for a very long time. But somehow, they still laughed, they still prayed, and they still believed tomorrow could be better. Desmond was not a lazy man. Every morning, he woke up before sunrise and left home searching for work. Any work. Construction sites, delivery jobs, loading vehicles, anything honest. Anything that could put food on the table. Sandra always joked that if hard work alone made people rich, Desmond would already own half of Lagos. And every time she said it, Desmond would laugh, because even when money was missing, Sandra somehow found a way to keep joy alive. Their apartment was small, very small. The roof leaked whenever rain fell. The fan worked only when it felt generous. And sometimes they had to choose between buying food or paying bills. But somehow, it still felt like home, because they had each other. At night, they would sit outside their apartment and talk about the future. Children, a better house, a business of their own. Simple dreams, normal dreams, dreams that didn't seem impossible. Not yet. But life has a strange way of changing without warning. Slowly, money started becoming harder to find. Jobs became fewer. Bills became larger. Rent piled up. Promises were made. Deadlines passed. Until one afternoon, their entire world was thrown outside. Literally. That afternoon, the rain would not stop. Desmond stood outside their apartment building holding an old travel bag. Sandra stood beside him, clutching a plastic container filled with clothes. Then, thud, another bag landed on the wet ground. Their landlord had thrown out everything. Mattress, clothes, buckets, even their wedding photo. Sandra quickly bent down and picked it up. The glass had cracked across the middle. For a moment, she just stared at it. Desmond looked away, because sometimes pain becomes too heavy to look at directly.
The landlord stood at the entrance, shaking his head. He was tired of waiting, tired of promises, tired of hearing next week. Desmond, he said coldly, I've waited 4 months already. Silence. I have children too. Then, bang. The door closed. Just like that. People passed, some looked, some whispered. Nobody helped. Sandra forced a smile and looked at her husband. We'll figure this out. Desmond looked at her. She was smiling, but her eyes had already betrayed her. And for the first time that day, he felt afraid. Not for himself, for her. Because hope was becoming harder to protect. Later that evening, they went to see Desmond's old friend, Chiki. Years ago, they had struggled together, shared meals together, even slept in the same room when life was hard. Desmond smiled weakly after the gate opened. Brother. Chike smiled too, but the smile didn't stay long. Desmond explained everything quietly, not asking for money, not asking for favors, just somewhere to stay for a few days. For a moment, Chike said nothing. Then he sighed. Guy, he looked around before stepping outside. I have given you the update before. Desmond frowned slightly. Chike lowered his voice. The delivery job. There was silence. Desmond stared at him. Chike continued. But you said no. He placed a hand on Desmond's shoulder. Look at you now. Desmond's face changed immediately. No, not this. Not again. Think about it. Silence. No stress. Silence. One trip and your problems are gone. Desmond slowly removed Chike's hand from his shoulder. No. Chike blinked. No? Desmond shook his head. Calmly, firmly. No, it's a sin against God. For a few seconds, Chike simply stared at him. Then he laughed. Not because it was funny, because he couldn't understand him. Lagos is not for people like you. Desmond said nothing. Then Chike looked directly into his eyes and smiled. If your God can help you, he stepped backward. Go and meet him. Bang. The gate closed. Desmond stood there, quietly. Sandra looked at him. No words came out, because some disappointments don't need explanations. Minutes later, they found themselves outside Sandra's friend's house. Hope returned to Sandra's face immediately. Jenny will understand. She smiled. I know she will. When Jenny opened the door, she immediately hugged Sandra. Sandra! For a moment, Sandra felt relief. Real relief. Maybe this was it. Maybe things were finally changing. Minutes later, they sat inside. Sandra explained everything. The eviction, the rejection, everything. Jenny became quiet. Very quiet. Then slowly, she looked at Sandra. What if I told you there was another way? Sandra frowned. What do you mean? Jenny hesitated, then spoke carefully. There's this chief. Silence. A very rich man. Sandra frowned harder. He has asked about you before. Sandra's expression changed immediately. Jenny continued. If you leave this suffering and agree to Chief's proposal, she glanced toward Desmond, your life will change immediately. Sandra looked at her, then slowly stood up. No. Jenny looked shocked. No? Sandra shook her head. No. I'm happily married to Desmond and I'm not leaving him for anything in the world. She looked toward Desmond. Not even money. Silence. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then Jenny sighed. If you won't help yourself. She looked away. Don't expect anyone else to. And just like that, another door closed. By nightfall, they had nowhere left to go. No friends, no options, no plan. Only each other. And one bridge waiting in the darkness. The place smelled of dust and rainwater. Cars thundered overhead. People passed nearby but barely looked. To most people, they were invisible. Desmond sat quietly against one of the concrete pillars. Sandra sat beside him. For a long time, neither spoke. There was nothing left to say. They had spent the entire day watching doors close, until finally, even silence became distant. Sandra slowly rested her head against his shoulder. Desmond stared ahead. His eyes looked empty now. Not because he had given up,
because he was tired, very tired. Then suddenly, Sandra smiled. Desmond frowned. "What is it?" She pointed upward. Desmond looked confused. "What am I looking at?" Sandra laughed softly. "The stars." Desmond stared at her. "The stars?" Sandra nodded. "We still have those." For a moment, Desmond just looked at her. Then he laughed quietly. Because somehow, even sitting beneath a bridge after losing everything, Sandra still found something to be grateful for. Silence returned. Then Desmond slowly reached for her hand. "Let's pray." Sandra immediately nodded. Both lowered their heads. No long prayer, no big words, no dramatic speech. Just two tired people speaking honestly. "God." Desmond's voice cracked. Silence. "We've tried." Silence. "We've done things the right way." Silence. "Please." His eyes closed tightly. "Don't leave us." That was all. Just that. Then, bang! A gunshot exploded somewhere nearby. Sandra jumped violently. People screamed. Another gunshot, then another. Cars screeched. Footsteps thundered. Suddenly, people were running everywhere. Panic swallowed the streets. "Run!" Desmond grabbed Sandra's hand. Immediately, chaos erupted around them. People pushed past. Someone crashed into Desmond. Another body slammed into Sandra. Their hands tightened. Then, another impact. Hard. Their fingers slipped. Desmond looked up instantly. "Sandra!" But people had already separated them. Bodies everywhere. Fear everywhere. "Sandra!" He saw her for 1 second. 1 second only. Then she disappeared into the crowd. Desmond pushed forward desperately. "Sandra!" Then suddenly, strong hands grabbed him from behind. Police. Before he could speak, they forced him against the vehicle. "Wait!" Desmond struggled. "No, you've made a mistake." Nobody listened. Not one person. Because nearby, real criminals were running. And in the middle of confusion, Desmond had become one of them. Meanwhile, Sandra kept running. She couldn't see him anymore, couldn't hear him anymore. Fear had taken over completely. Then suddenly, bright headlights appeared ahead. Her eyes widened. Screech! Everything went black. For a moment, there was nothing. Then slowly, voices began to appear through the darkness. People shouting, footsteps running, confusion everywhere. Someone had found her. Someone was trying to save her. Then, everything disappeared again.
Chief Adeyemi stared at the young woman lying on the hospital bed. Something about her felt familiar. Very familiar. Then suddenly, it hit him. His eyes widened. "No! Impossible!" Slowly, he stepped closer. The eyes, the face, then the word escaped his lips. "Sandra." There was silence. For the first time in years, fear appeared on Chief's face. Real fear. Just then, the doctor walked in. He glanced at Sandra's file, then frowned. "I think she lost her memory." Silence. Chief stared at Sandra. Then, slowly, his fear disappeared. And a smile replaced it. Not relief. Something darker. Something dangerous. Because suddenly, the only person who could recognize him no longer remembered who he was. And Chief intended to keep it that way.
Sandra didn't know how long she had been unconscious. Seconds, minutes, hours. She couldn't tell. The first thing she heard was a strange beeping sound. Beep, beep, beep. Then voices, distant voices. Slowly,
She opened her eyes. White ceiling, bright lights, cold air. Confusion immediately flooded her face. She tried to sit up. Pain shot through her head. Ah! Instantly, someone moved beside her. Easy. A calm voice. Sandra looked slowly toward him. An older man sat beside the bed, neatly dressed, quiet face, kind eyes. For several seconds, she stared at him. Then, a strange feeling crashed through her. Cold, uncomfortable, like seeing something she should recognize, but couldn't. Gone immediately. The doctor moved closer. "How are you feeling?" Sandra looked around slowly. Hospital, machines, strangers. Nothing made sense. Then the question came. "Do you know your name?" Sandra opened her mouth immediately, then froze. Silence. Fear slowly entered her eyes. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Her breathing changed. "My name." Nothing. Panic flooded her face instantly. "Who am I?" Silence. Real silence. The doctor exchanged glances with the nurse. Then, finally, "You've suffered trauma." Sandra stared. "We think you've lost your memory." No, no, no. Sandra shook her head immediately. "No, I remember." She stopped. Because she didn't. Not her parents, not where she lived, not Desmond, nothing. The older man slowly leaned forward. His voice remained calm. "You were in an accident." Sandra looked at him. "You brought me here?" He nodded slowly. Silence. "My name is Chief Adeyemi." He smiled gently. "Don't worry. You are safe now." Sandra nodded slowly. But for some reason, that strange feeling returned again. Outside the room, Chief quietly closed the door. The smile disappeared immediately. Slowly, he turned toward his assistant. Silence. For a few seconds, he said nothing. Then, "Find out everything about the girl." His assistant frowned. "Everything, sir?" Chief looked back through the small glass window. Sandra was still lying on the hospital bed, lost, confused, completely unaware. His face became cold, very cold. "And make sure nobody finds her first."
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.